Neediness is not love. It is not connection. It is not passion. It is a silent scream that says, I am not enough without you. And when that energy is present, it suffocates attraction before it ever has a chance to grow. A woman may believe she is showing care, attention, or vulnerability when she becomes overly available or seeks constant reassurance, but to a man, it reads as insecurity. It translates into emotional heaviness. The very thing she hopes will draw him closer ends up silently pushing him away. When you abandon your own presence in order to orbit around his, you give away your power. You trade your inner authority for his attention, and that trade is always too expensive. A woman who is deeply rooted in herself is magnetic. Not because of what she says or how she looks, but because of how little she needs validation from anyone. She doesn't chase presence, but when neediness takes over, it distorts that. Suddenly, her self-worth is tied to how quickly he texts back. Her mood depends on whether he compliments her. Her peace is interrupted every time he withdraws his energy. And this dynamic is felt. A man doesn't always consciously register this, but he begins to feel the emotional weight of being her source of happiness. That is not connection. That is dependency. And no man wants to feel like a woman's emotional oxygen tank. He wants to feel chosen, not responsible. You might text too much, not because you're excited, but because you're anxious. You want to know where he is, what he's doing, and why he hasn't responded, not because of love, but because of fear. The fear that if you don't stay on his radar, he'll forget you. That energy is loud. It's not in the words, it's in the frequency. Men don't always respond to the content of what you say. They respond to the energy behind it. And neediness always carries a vibration of lack, of emotional hunger. A man is naturally drawn to a woman who values herself, who walks in calm confidence, who doesn't need constant reassurance because her validation is internal. But when you constantly seek to prove your place in his life, you begin to look like someone who doesn't know her own value. And when you forget your value, he will too. This doesn't mean you don't express your feelings. This doesn't mean you play cold or indifferent. That's manipulation, and manipulation is not power. Power is being able to be fully present with yourself, whether he is near you or not. When you're not grounded in yourself, you begin to perform. You become overly agreeable, always available, canceling your own plans just to fit into his schedule. You stop being a woman. You start being an emotional servant to his approval. And the moment you do that, the attraction begins to erode. Slowly, quietly, without warning. And here's what makes it worse. Most of the time, you won't even notice it happening. You'll think everything's going well, but you'll feel that his energy is off. He doesn't call like he used to. He takes longer to respond. He seems distracted, distant. You try harder. You become sweeter, more available. You say, let me know if you need anything. You try to be the perfect woman, and all it does is amplify your emotional hunger. He sees it. He feels it. And it makes him run. Not because he doesn't want love, but because no one wants to be devoured by someone else's emptiness. When you are needy, you lose the mystery, you lose the fire, you become predictable. Men respect a woman who is warm but self-contained. They admire a woman who loves but who never begs, because she knows if a man truly values her, he will come correct. She doesn't demand his presence. She invites it. And if he doesn't show up with honor, she walks. Not with anger, not with revenge. The truth is, a man does not determine your value, you do. And when you are centered in that knowing, you don't need to call, text, or beg for attention. You don't have to wonder if you're enough. You don't have to become emotionally small to make him feel big. You simply exist in your own power. You are the calm in the room, not the chaos. You are the stillness in the storm, not the one creating it. And the man who is ready, the one who is truly grounded himself, will not only feel that, he will honor it. Neediness dies when self-trust is born. The more you trust your worth, the less you need anyone else to confirm it. You stop playing roles. You stop trying to prove. You stop making your entire emotional climate dependent on someone else's attention. You rise back into your own light. You come home to yourself, because that is where your value lives. Not in his response, not in his approval, not in his effort, but in how deeply you are connected to who you are when no one is watching. There's a difference between vulnerability and emotional exposure without boundaries. Many women are taught that being open, honest, and emotionally expressive will bring them closer to a man. And while that may be true in the context of mutual trust and emotional maturity, oversharing, especially too soon or too often, can have the opposite effect. When you reveal too much too fast, it doesn't create intimacy. It creates discomfort, not because your feelings are too much, but because you're offering depth before there's been a foundation to hold it. A man needs time to earn your story. He needs time to show that he is capable of holding your truth, your past, your pain, not out of obligation, but from a place of earned trust. But when you bring your wounds to the table early on, hoping that your honesty will spark connection, it rarely does. Instead, it tells him, I don't know how to protect myself emotionally, so I'm handing you the keys to my internal world, hoping you'll do it for me. And that's not romantic, that's emotional risk without structure. You may feel tempted to share everything: how your last relationship ended, how heartbroken you've been, how you have trust issues, how you've been betrayed. And you might think that this level of openness will allow him to see the real you. But often what it does is place emotional weight on someone who hasn't proven they can carry it. It turns what could have been light and engaging moments into therapy sessions. He begins to see you not as a woman who is stable and radiant, but as someone who is still bleeding emotionally and using him as the bandage. There is wisdom in timing. Sharing is not the issue, timing is. A woman who has emotional intelligence knows when to speak and when to hold. She understands that not every part of her life story needs to be on display. She discerns who has earned access, who has earned the right to know what shaped her, who deserves the deeper chapters. And because she protects her inner world, she becomes more attractive, not less. She creates mystery, not to play games, but because she knows her soul is valuable. And not everyone gets a front row seat. The truth is, emotional overexposure is a byproduct of unhealed wounds. When a woman hasn't processed her pain, she tries to release it through constant expression. But pain that is unprocessed becomes a pattern. And patterns repeated often enough begin to define how you relate. So now every conversation becomes a story about what someone did to you. Every moment becomes another opportunity to confess how hurt you've been. That energy repels, not because the man is cold, but because he begins to feel like your emotional trash bin instead of your partner. No man wants to feel like he's responsible for your healing. That's a journey he can support, but not carry for you. You have to ask yourself, am I sharing this because it's time, or because I'm looking for validation? Am I opening up because I've built trust with this man, or because I'm afraid that if I don't let him in fast, he'll leave? When you are grounded, you don't share your pain for acceptance. You share your truth from strength. You don't speak to gain sympathy. You speak to be understood. And only by those who have proven they deserve that access. Sometimes oversharing is also an unconscious test. You tell him everything about your past to see if he'll stay. But that's not a test of love. That's a test of tolerance. And when someone tolerates you, they don't value you. When a man sees you oversharing, especially if it's heavy, he may stay silent, but his mind is taking notes. He's registering the lack of emotional boundaries. He's sensing that you may need more emotional care than he is willing to give. And over time, that turns into distance, not always by action, but by energy. He pulls back. The communication becomes shorter. The interest starts to fade. Not because you aren't worthy of love, but because you gave too much of yourself before he earned the right to see it. You don't have to bleed in front of someone to be seen. You don't have to relive every hurt just to feel connection. Your presence is already enough. Your energy, when it's whole, when it's calm, when it's rooted, speaks volumes without you ever having to say a word. But when you bring your emotional history into every interaction, you stop living in the present. You become attached to your identity through pain. You stop being a woman he wants to explore, and instead you become someone he feels responsible for fixing. Being vulnerable is powerful, but only when it's intentional. When your wounds still control your speech, you're not being real, you're being reactive. And reactions are based in fear. You don't need to share everything to feel loved. You need to love yourself enough to know when to speak, how much to reveal, and when to hold back. Because in restraint, there is elegance. In timing, there is respect. And in protecting your heart, you teach others how to treat it. Masculine energy naturally seeks to give, to provide, to pursue. It's wired to move toward what it desires. But when a woman steps out of her feminine essence and begins to lead the dynamic, chasing, initiating, constantly over-investing, she unknowingly disrupts the polarity that creates attraction. She takes on a role that belongs to the man, and in doing so, she shifts the energetic dance into imbalance. What begins as interest from him quickly turns into passivity. He relaxes, she intensifies, and the whole rhythm changes. And the moment that balance is broken, so is the mystery that once pulled him in. There is a deep truth most don't speak of. Men do not value what they don't have to work for. It's not about playing hard to get. It's about being rooted in your value so deeply that you don't feel the need to overgive in order to be noticed. When a woman leads the connection, always texting first, always planning, always reminding him of what he needs to do, she becomes the masculine force. She becomes the initiator, the director, the giver. And this may feel natural to her, especially if she's used to being in control, solving problems, and making things happen in her own life. But in a romantic connection, what feels like effort to her often feels like pressure to him. When you constantly reach out, when you always plan the next date, when you always ask where things are going, you remove the space needed for a man to feel his desire rise. He no longer has to step forward because you've already filled that space. Attraction needs distance to grow. Desire is born in the unknown. When you remove all of the unknowns by being emotionally and physically ever present, you kill the very curiosity that would make him want to discover more of you. And the more you chase, the more he withdraws. Not because he's playing games, but because the dynamic has shifted from magnetic to mechanical. You're chasing something that only had the potential to flourish if it had room to breathe. The more you push, the more he feels overwhelmed. The more you direct the path, the more he starts to question if he even wants to walk it. And then you begin to feel confused, asking yourself, why is he acting cold? Why doesn't he try like I do? Why do I feel like I'm carrying this connection on my back? It's because you are. A man cannot lead where there is no room to step in. If you are already standing in the role of initiator, there's nothing left for him to do but follow or leave. Most leave, not out of disrespect, but out of a loss of interest. Men are not drawn to control, they are drawn to presence. When a woman is in her feminine, she doesn't need to chase because she is already the magnet. Her energy invites, her stillness speaks, her openness creates space for pursuit. And it is in that space that a man can rise. Overgiving is not generosity, it's self-betrayal disguised as love. When you constantly go out of your way, not because it feels good, but because you're hoping it will secure his attention, you are giving from fear. You're trying to earn something that should flow naturally. You don't need to be the one who always reaches out. You don't need to orchestrate every move to make sure the connection survives. That's not love. That's emotional labor rooted in scarcity. When you are constantly in action, you are not in receiving. And a woman who cannot receive attention, affection, effort is a woman who will always be tired in love, because she's doing both her job and his. And love is not supposed to exhaust you. If you are doing more than you're receiving, it's not a connection, it's an imbalance. And no amount of proving yourself will fix that. You must shift your energy. You must let go of control. You must allow space. You must trust that the right man will step forward when you step back into yourself. There is nothing more powerful than a woman who knows how to lean into her feminine energy, not to manipulate, not to get attention, but because she knows her value is not in how much she does, but in who she is. She is not in a rush. She is not begging for time. She is not scrambling to prove her place in his life. She is a calm presence that gives a man the opportunity to show up or not. And if he doesn't, she does not chase. She simply continues walking in her worth, knowing that what is aligned will never need to be forced. Because true power is not in the pursuit. True power is in the stillness that draws the right pursuit to you. One of the most subtle yet damaging habits that quietly kills your value in front of a man is the constant need for validation. It doesn't always show up in dramatic or obvious ways. It's often disguised as seeking reassurance, asking questions that mask insecurity, or consistently needing confirmation of your place in his life. And while it may seem harmless at first, over time, it begins to chip away at the foundation of respect, admiration, and attraction that once held the connection together. When a woman doubts herself, she starts to project those doubts onto the relationship. She begins to question his intentions, not because he's done something wrong, but because she hasn't built internal security. She starts asking, do you still like me? Or are you sure you're not talking to anyone else? Or why didn't you call me back right away? These questions may come from a place of vulnerability, but to a man, they often feel like interrogation. He starts to feel like he's walking on emotional eggshells, constantly needing to say or do the right thing just to keep her grounded. And eventually that weight becomes too heavy to carry. Validation seeking creates emotional dependence. It places the responsibility of your peace, confidence, and self-worth into someone else's hands. It makes a man feel like he's not engaging in a relationship, but performing in a role he never signed up for, the role of your emotional caretaker. And once he feels that dynamic settling in, he begins to withdraw. Not because he doesn't care, but because the energy becomes draining. Relationships thrive in mutual respect, not in emotional babysitting. A woman who cannot self-regulate becomes exhausting over time, no matter how beautiful or kind she may be. When you constantly seek his attention or approval, you slowly start to lose the very mystery and confidence that drew him in to begin with. He didn't fall for you because you needed him. He was drawn to your energy, your light, your calm. But when that turns into emotional volatility, when your joy rises or falls based on whether or not he responded to your message, that's when the scales tip. He starts to see you as someone who is governed by external validation, someone who doesn't yet know her worth deeply enough to stand tall in silence. There is power in not reacting. There is strength in holding your composure when your mind is spiraling. The woman who doesn't need to chase after answers, who doesn't panic when things feel uncertain, radiates a rare kind of grace. She's not emotionally detached. She's emotionally mature. She understands that not every unanswered message is rejection. Not every delayed response is betrayal. She's mastered the art of self-reassurance. She knows how to return to her center instead of spiraling into narratives that are rooted in fear. This doesn't mean she doesn't feel. It means she chooses to respond rather than react. When a man sees that a woman can handle uncertainty with poise, he begins to trust her energy. He doesn't feel pressure, he feels peace. And in that peace, he draws closer. Because a man is magnetized by the woman who isn't always trying to prove herself. She doesn't need to hear "I love you" 20 times a day to feel worthy. She doesn't fish for compliments to feel seen. She carries a quiet assurance that says, "I know who I am," with or without you confirming it. But when you seek constant validation, you begin to silence your own intuition. You stop listening to your internal voice, and instead, you become addicted to outside responses. If he compliments you, you feel beautiful. If he doesn't, you feel invisible. If he texts you back quickly, you feel secure. If he takes a little longer, you feel abandoned. And this emotional roller coaster becomes your norm. A cycle of highs and lows completely dependent on another person's availability. That's not love. That's emotional volatility disguised as connection. When you trust yourself, you stop needing proof of your worth. You stop asking someone else to remind you of your value. You become the source. You look in the mirror and validate yourself before anyone else gets the chance. You affirm your beauty, your presence, your essence. And when a man comes along, he's not filling a void. He's adding to an already full cup. That energy is unshakable. That kind of woman doesn't panic if someone pulls away. She doesn't spiral if plans shift. She breathes. She reassesses. She moves in alignment with herself. And that is rare. That is unforgettable. The woman who no longer needs to be validated is the woman who becomes the standard. She becomes the one who isn't swayed by the tides of someone's temporary attention. She's anchored. She doesn't seek clarity through begging, but through boundaries. She doesn't chase love, she becomes love. And because she is love, she knows that nothing outside of her can define her value. Not his silence, not his distance, not his confusion. She doesn't internalize rejection because she's too rooted in her truth to be shaken by temporary behavior. And that energy is the highest form of magnetism. When a woman tolerates disrespect, whether it's subtle or overt, she unconsciously teaches the man how to treat her. She sends a message, not just to him, but to herself, a message that says, "This is acceptable." And over time, that acceptance becomes the baseline of the relationship. The first time he dismisses her feelings and she says nothing, the boundary is moved. The first time he talks over her, minimizes her dreams, laughs at her pain, or disappears without explanation, and she welcomes him back without accountability, she teaches him that she will remain even in the absence of honor. This respect doesn't always scream, sometimes it whispers. It looks like being placed last after everything else in his life. It looks like him keeping you hidden, refusing to define the relationship, or showing up only when it's convenient for him. It's in the patterns, the broken promises, the inconsistencies, the words that don't match the actions. And the moment a woman justifies those actions, even in her own mind, she begins to shrink herself. She stops expressing her standards because she's afraid of losing him. She waters herself down to keep the peace, forgetting that any peace that requires your silence isn't peace at all. It's control. A man will only value what he has to rise up to meet. If a woman lowers herself to stay in connection, the man no longer has to grow. He simply continues operating at the level she allows. And eventually, his respect for her begins to erode. Not necessarily out of cruelty, but out of familiarity. What he once admired, her strength, her clarity, her confidence, now fades into background noise because she no longer stands on her worth. She bends, she excuses, she stays, even when everything inside her says she should walk away. When you tolerate poor treatment, you disconnect from your own intuition. You override the feeling that tells you this doesn't feel right. And the longer you stay in that space, the more you begin to question yourself rather than questioning the behavior. You wonder if you're overreacting, if you're being too sensitive, if maybe you just need to be more patient. And that self-doubt becomes the doorway through which disrespect enters and remains. Because disrespect only thrives in spaces where clarity is lacking, where standards are not enforced, where self-worth is negotiable. What's worse is that the longer you accept it, the more numb you become to it. The behavior that once bothered you becomes normalized. You start saying things like, at least he doesn't cheat, or he's just bad at communication, or I know he cares deep down. You romanticize potential while ignoring the reality. And the danger in this is not just the damage he causes, it's the damage you inflict on yourself by staying in a space that dishonors your spirit. Every time you accept less, you teach yourself to expect less. And that is how a powerful woman becomes a powerless version of herself. Men are wired to test boundaries, not maliciously, but naturally. They want to know what the limits are, what is and isn't acceptable. And a woman's boundaries are not communicated by her words alone, but by her actions. It's not enough to say, I won't tolerate that. You must show it. If you say disrespect is a deal breaker, but continue to engage with it, you send conflicting messages. He learns that your words are hollow, that your standards are flexible. And once that becomes the norm, it's nearly impossible to return to balance. The strongest message a woman can send is her silence in the face of disrespect. Not silence out of fear, but silence as a response to clarity. When a man knows you will walk away the moment his actions betray your worth, he will either rise or remove himself. And either way, you win. Because you are not here to beg for decency. You are not here to educate a grown man on how to treat you. You are not here to fight for the bare minimum and call it love. You are here to reflect the energy you deserve. And that starts by refusing to tolerate what you know would destroy your peace. Disrespect often disguises itself in charm. A man might be affectionate one day and cold the next. He might apologize without changing, compliment you while ignoring your needs, show up with flowers but never with emotional maturity. And it is your job not to be seduced by temporary gestures. You must look at the pattern, not the performance. You must trust the energy more than the excuses. Because a man who truly values you will not make you question your worth. He won't play hot and cold. He won't create anxiety and call it passion. He won't disappear and return expecting open arms. He will be consistent. He will be clear. And he will honor the space you create, if that space is built on self-respect. The more a woman honors herself, the more she becomes immune to the kind of man who thrives on confusion. She becomes unavailable to chaos. She no longer entertains disrespect dressed as affection. Her energy shifts. She stops asking, why won't he change? And starts asking, why am I allowing this? And in that moment, the power returns, not because he changed, but because she did. Because she remembered who she is, because she chose herself, not in arrogance, but in sacred reverence for the woman she's always been, underneath the noise, the pain, and the fear of being alone. There is something profoundly self-destructive about abandoning your own purpose just to be accepted by a man. It happens slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. One day you skip a workout because he wanted to sleep in. Another day you cancel an important meeting because he needed you. Before long, your schedule starts to revolve around his. Your priorities take a back seat to his preferences. And what once gave you life, your goals, your passions, your mission, starts to fade into the background while you try to be everything he wants. It feels like love, but in reality, it's a slow erosion of self. When a woman disconnects from her sense of purpose, she disconnects from her power. Her energy becomes reactive instead of creative. Instead of leading with clarity, she begins to chase validation. Instead of building something meaningful in her own life, she invests all of her energy into building comfort for someone else, often at the cost of her own growth. Her confidence, once rooted in her progress and alignment, now becomes dependent on how much attention he gives her, how he feels, and whether he approves. And the moment your confidence becomes externally dependent, you lose control over your own worth. Purpose is not just about career or ambition. It's about direction. It's about knowing who you are, what you're here for, and what matters most to you. It's about waking up with a reason that extends beyond pleasing another person. And when you surrender that direction, you become easy to manipulate. You become malleable, able to be shaped and reshaped by his moods, his words, his absence. You lose your ability to say no, not because you don't want to, but because you've forgotten what you were saying yes to in the first place. The tragedy is that many women don't even realize they're giving up their purpose. It doesn't always feel like sacrifice. Sometimes it feels like compromise or commitment or love. But love is not supposed to strip you of yourself. It's supposed to magnify who you are. It's supposed to support your growth, not silence it. A relationship that requires you to become smaller, quieter, or less driven in order to survive is not a relationship, it's a cage. And the longer you stay in that cage, the more you convince yourself that freedom is dangerous, that dreams are distractions, that self-focus is selfish. When a woman steps out of alignment with her purpose, she starts to seek fulfillment in places that were never meant to satisfy her. She looks for meaning in his attention. She looks for identity in his validation. She becomes anxious when he pulls away, not because he's essential to her wholeness, but because she's abandoned the parts of herself that made her feel whole before he arrived. This emotional dependence doesn't just kill your value in front of a man, it kills your value in your own eyes. You begin to doubt your worth unless someone else is confirming it. You start to fear losing him more than you fear losing yourself. Men can feel this. They may not be able to articulate it, but they feel when a woman is disconnected from her own life force. They feel when she's orbiting around them instead of standing on her own ground. And rather than inspiring deeper connection, it often creates the opposite: distance, disinterest, even disrespect. A man does not value a woman who has made him her God. He might enjoy the attention, but he will not honor the sacrifice, because subconsciously he understands that anything earned through self-betrayal cannot be sustained with integrity. A woman walking in her purpose becomes magnetic, not because she tries to attract, but because she's already fulfilled. She isn't desperate for affection because she's not starving for identity. She doesn't tolerate emotional inconsistency because her time has value. She doesn't chase because she's too busy creating. And that energy, that calm, powerful certainty is what commands respect. When a man sees that a woman will not pause her life to accommodate his confusion, he either levels up or walks away, and either way, she remains whole. What's dangerous is not just abandoning your purpose for a man, it's staying in that state for too long, because the longer you stay off track, the harder it becomes to remember what direction you were heading in. You lose time, you lose momentum, you lose parts of yourself that were once alive and vibrant. And then one day you wake up beside someone who no longer values you, realizing that somewhere along the line you stopped valuing yourself. You traded your path for his presence, and now you have neither. Purpose anchors you. It reminds you that your life is not a supporting role in someone else's movie. It gives you discernment, the ability to choose connection without compromising yourself. When you're in alignment with your vision, you don't need to beg to be seen. You don't need to cling to someone who's unsure. You move with confidence because you know that love should not cost you your purpose. It should walk beside it, not replace it. A woman rooted in her mission will never be easy to control, and that's exactly why she is powerful beyond measure.